Hello folks, this week's news update is going to be a little bit different as there's a mixture of news from the last couple of weeks along with my initial reactions from the launch of The War Within. And I have to say, those reactions came as a bit of a surprise to even me. So let's dive in. For me, the start of a new World of Warcraft expansion is the one bit that Blizzard have never ever really got wrong. That glut of new content, new zones and new storylines to explore allows, I think, a lot of us to be able to just dive in and enjoy the experience. This time around was in some ways no exception to that rule, but in other ways it was surprisingly different. I do plan to do a full review in a couple of weeks, so subscribe so you get notified when that goes live. But for now, here's my initial thoughts. The leveling up experience delivered a story that for me is probably the best since Legion's Suramar story. But this time around, it wasn't just one zone at the end of an otherwise average experience, but an awesome story that was woven across all 4 of the zones. For me, the major highlights were Azeroth apparently intervening in the Earthen's fate and then releasing Magni, something that possibly for the first time ever in WoW made me tear up a bit. And then there was of course Xal'atath, whose appearances, while quite sparse, were consistently climactic, aided by Claudia Christensen of Babylon 5's vocal performance and some outstanding direction. She delivered her moments with sensual malice and is clearly having a lot of fun as she seeks to progress a goal that remains shrouded in mystery. Zone-wise, my original fears that having 3 zones underground might not land well with players has been resoundingly dispelled, with Halifalt being the absolute star of the show, with an almost steampunk high fantasy vibe combined with an underlying spooky story that lets us know that in this zone there really are things in the dark to be scared of. It wasn't all perfect, of course. The reveal that Xal'atath was disguised as a Kirin Tor member could have been even better if it had been given a bit more setup. Unless you follow Nobler Bellular videos, or maybe did Warcraft 3 back in the day, Archmage Drengen is little more than a random Dalaran citizen to you. Don't get me wrong, it was still a good reveal, but it could have been so much better. The biggest letdown though were the cinematics in the max level campaign, none of which had a vocal track thanks to a major bug. Sadly for me, the lack of any warning about the bug meant I didn't know to have subtitles on, which left me having to rewatch them in Wowhead's channel. While I will no doubt be able to rewatch them in alts eventually, it's never going to be the same as it would have been being able to experience them first time around. Sadly, this isn't the first time major cinematic events have been marred by launch bugs. Moving into endgame, and it's a very different experience to the past, with no Mythic Zero World Tour. We've actually now got time to enjoy the dungeons in heroic difficulty, and I have to say that the early impressions of those dungeons is a lot more positive than those in Dragonflight, with the exception of Dawnbreaker, which is still very buggy and kinda does need a bit more work to help to signpost the navigation from boss to boss. It is of course too early to know how the expansion will go. There is a long history in World of Warcraft of everyone loving the first few days, only for things to go a bit sour a week or 2 in. But as a start to an expansion, this feels stronger overall than even Legion. It's now entirely in Blizzard's hand to see if they can hit the very open goal that's now waiting for them. Only time will tell. One thing that did jump out to me was how smooth the release was, with both early and delayed access being ultra stable, and the overall experience has been close to flawless, apart from those issues with the Dawnbreaker dungeon and the max level campaign cinematic. With the pre-patch having a very bumpy release, and of course the bugginess of the later patches in Dragonflight, this was a very pleasant surprise, and one that I hope Blizzard intends to continue with. Now, there have been some ongoing issues with the auction house, mostly poor performance and some zombie listings, which are making buyer harder than it needs to be, but with the likely influx of players, there was always going to be some issues, and these are far less game breaking than the ones that we've seen in the past. Anyways, let's get on to some news updates, and I want to start by going back to a developer interview that was just before the launch with none other than Chris Metzen himself. I will link below in case you missed it, but it has revealed a couple of details that have certainly sparked my interest. The first of these was that The War Within was actually already in production and mostly locked in when Chris rejoined Blizzard back at the start of Dragonflight. And this means that his impact is only really going to start to be felt as we go into Midnight and The Last Titan, which has given me a very strong sense that things are potentially only going to get even better from here. Another more significant hint from Chris was that Xal'atath now seems unlikely to be the end boss of The War Within, or if she is, it'll be a boss that we won't manage to defeat, with a very strong promise that we'll be confronting her multiple times over the course of the whole World Sword saga. And if you're wondering about that sword, well, that's not going to be resolved until The Last Titan, with Chris dropping another major hint that we might be seeing a return of Illidan. Now, I don't know about you, but I really can't wait for those other expansions. Staying in the subject of developer interviews, and with the recent Gamescom event, we also got several super interesting snippets about the potential future for the game. One of those came from game director Ian Hazzikostas in a Mr. GM interview, which is that the remix concept is very likely to continue, most likely covering a different expansion. And while Ian was a bit coy about when we might see BFA Timewalking being added, he did reveal that Timewalking is going to play a big part of the upcoming 20th anniversary event that's coming this fall. As with any new expansion, there are always going to be some issues that come up for the developers, even when we as players don't fully notice them. One of the most discussed, shall we say, has been leveling difficulty. I certainly noticed when leveling up that I was seriously overpowered. As I have mythic gear, that wasn't totally unexpected, but that lasted me all the way until I hit level 80 where, well, oh boy, let's just say going from 45% haste to 8% haste and a protection paladin really isn't fun. As it turns out, Blizzard has found that the leveling scaling was a bit off, with level 70s being ultra strong in the new zones. Blizzard have now hot fixed this to have a more, I guess, normal difficulty curve. With early access, this did get a lot of pushback, as of course the early access folks got the overpowered leveling. This, I think, is a fair argument, and there is a strong argument, I think, that Blizzard should have delayed the change until next week's reset to give the delayed folk a fairer time to catch up and have that same experience that we did in early access. That said, those nerfs honestly are not as bad as they sound. Blizzard's changes have been mild to say the least, and even for an item level 350 player, leveling in The War Within is pretty fast and, yes, still very easy. So this is mainly more of a case of something not looking good rather than actually being bad in reality. But at the same time, this is a problem entirely of Blizzard's making. Had they, or more likely Microsoft, not got greedy and introduced early access, this feeling of unfairness that some players now have would not have existed. Before I move on, take a look at a few things that are coming up in the near future. I do have a couple of hot tips for you. The first of those is that if you're not a PvP fan, but you do want to grab some honour, due to an issue with this week's planned PvP brawl, Blizzard have had to switch it over to Comp Stomp instead. That special PvP brawl against NPC AI enemies. While our current level 80 gear does make Comp Stomp a little harder than usual, it's still not exactly difficult, maybe taking 10 minutes per run rather than the usual 5. So if you want to get some of those juicy old PvP appearances, now is definitely the time to dive in. My second tip is for professions. With the new system, the #1 priority at the start of an expansion is getting profession knowledge. And it turns out there's a source of knowledge points that, from what I have seen, have been missed out for a fair few of the guides. If you head over to Lyrindal and Dornegal, who hangs out near the crafting order station, they sell a set of 3 books per profession that grant 10 knowledge each, or even 15 if you're a gatherer. This is rather a lot of knowledge points. The only catch is that you need Artisan's Acuity, and quite a bit of it. You're not going to be able to buy all of these books in week 1 or week 2 of the expansion, but if you can spare the Acuity, you're probably going to want them as soon as you can get them. One bit of advice I do have is that if you've been keeping the Acuity for your blue crafting tools, is to actually actually checked the overall cost compared to these skill points. At least for my gatherer, it appears that getting the green tools and accessories for now and then buying these books, I can actually get more bang for buck than I can going straight to the blue tools. But do check your profession's numbers and keep in mind that the secondary stats on the tools might be valuable for you, especially if, for example, you're looking for a multi-craft or inspiration build. Even though the ink is still wet on the new expansion, time is, believe it or not, still progressing normally, and this Sunday sees the start of a new month, and that means there's two other major things to look forward to in-game. First of those is the trading post for September. The new trading post has a distinctly piratical feel to it, with 3 colours of the Plunderstorm transmog set, a shark-themed hat, and a brand new Crocolisk mount. In fact, we're getting 2 new Crocolisk mounts, which are re-colours of the BFA Brawlers Guild reward. Kegleg's Radiant Crocolisk costs 600 tender, and the Plunder Lord's Golden Crocolisk is this month's bonus reward for collecting 1000 tender. In my view, the bonus rewards have been feeling a little bit meh of late, and it's nice to see a cool mount being rolled out for the first trading post of the new expansion. Now, if you're a returning player, the trading post is a monthly bonus reward system. You get 500 traders tender, that's the post currency, just for being subbed for a month. And you get another 500 for doing in-game activities. Most time, just playing the game normally is enough to cap that in a couple of days. The other event coming up on Sunday is the start of this month's Darkmoon Faire. With all of us trying to find as much profession knowledge as possible, it's probably worth reminding you that the profession quests in the Darkmoon Faire will always award knowledge points for both War Within and Dragonflight professions. In my experience, you can knock that out in a matter of 10 minutes or so, and even if you usually skip it, for the next few months you're probably going to want to drop by and get them done. And of course, you'll probably also want to pick up the reputation and XP buff and maybe a few top hats to help you progress your renown. Now, if you run out of stuff to do while you're waiting for the new season, then I have one final tip for you. Legacy loot mode automatically activates when you outlevel content by more than 11 levels, and that means that Shadowlands is now in legacy loot mode for the dungeons and raid. Many of the Shadowlands raids were actually quite soloable or very close to it in the lower difficulty, so this could be a very good time to start running some for those appearances and mounts. Just a thought. Now, it would not be one of my news videos without a little bit of a look to the future. It's probably going to be a little while before we get a new PTR, but believe it or not, there are signs of not just one, but 2 new patches to look forward to soon. Yes, you did hear that right. Both patch 11.05 and patch 11.07 have been spotted on the internal developer build. 11.05 is the last entry in the 2024 roadmap and will likely focus on the 20th anniversary event, which leaves 11.07 as a bit of a mystery. If we assume, as some developer interviews have hinted, that the 8-week cycle is to continue, then we'll probably see 11.05 in October, meaning there could just barely be time for another patch to slip in before the end of the year. Well, maybe. We don't know anything about 11.07, but with no equivalent to the Evoker starting zone, it's going to have to do some work to match up to 10.07, the first ever major patch to introduce a whole new zone. What all this does suggest though is that Blizzard have no plans to slow down on the release pacing. Something that I had been wondering about was if the issues with quality control that we've seen could have made Blizzard decide to slow down a bit, but seemingly not. That vibe we had in Dragonflight, where a new patch was on the PTR within a week or two of the last being released, created a feeling that there was always something new around the corner, and I absolutely loved it. Which means for me, seeing these hints before even the expansion gets going is still kinda exciting. But what do you all think? Are you excited to see that there's more coming? Or with a whole new expansion to dive into, does it just feel a bit early for you? And of course, tell me about that new expansion. Has it landed for you? Are you excited or is it disappointing you? Let me know in the comments down below. I want to say a huge thanks to everybody who has watched, comment, liked or subscribed to my channel so far. Your support has been amazing and helps to keep me going producing these videos. If you've enjoyed this update, let me know either in the comments or by hitting that thumbs up icon. We're now in the final push towards 1k subscriber mark, and if you've not subscribed yet, it would mean the world to me if you could help me get there a little sooner. As we power into the new expansion, I'll be keeping you up to date with all the news, along with my usual guides, opinion pieces, reviews and previews. And if you've subscribed, you can also get notified whenever one goes live by hitting the bell icon. I have high hopes for the War Within. Thanks for starting that journey out with me, and I'll be back soon.